The eviction notice was taped to our apartment door when I came home from my double shift at the hospital. My scrub still smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion as I stared at the bold red letters, 72 hours to vacate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My daughter Emma tugged at my sleeve. Mama, why is there paper on our door? I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. Behind me, my son Marcus shifted his backpack, his 12-year-old eyes already understanding what his 8-year-old sister didn't. We're being kicked out, aren't we? His voice cracked on the last word. I ripped the notice down, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. Inside, our modest 2-bedroom apartment looked the same as it had this morning. Emma's drawings still covered the refrigerator. Marcus's basketball sat in the corner. The breakfast dishes I hadn't had time to wash were still in the sink. Everything was the same, except now we had 3 days to leave. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers and called the number I'd been avoiding for 2 months. The number that used to be saved as David, but was now just David Morrison. It went straight to voicemail, like it had the last 47 times. David, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The landlord is evicting us. You haven't paid rent in 4 months. Our children need a place to sleep. Call me back. I hung up and immediately dialed again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Emma was watching me with those wide brown eyes that looked so much like her father's. Is Daddy coming home? No, baby, I said, kneeling down to her level. But everything's going to be okay. It was a lie. Nothing was okay. Nothing had been okay since the day 6 months ago when David walked out with 2 suitcases and a smile I'd never seen before. I need to find myself. Rachel, he'd said, as if he were the protagonist in some inspirational journey rather than a 42-year-old man abandoning his family. This life, it's suffocating me. The kids, the bills, the responsibility. I can't breathe. I'd been too shocked to respond. We'd been married for 14 years. I'd put him through business school while working full-time. I'd supported his dreams of starting a consulting firm. I'd raised our children largely alone while he built his career, and he couldn't breathe. I'll send money, he'd promised. I'll make sure you're taken care of. That was 6 months ago. The money came twice. Then it stopped. The phone calls became less frequent, then stopped entirely. The man who'd promised to love and cherish me had simply evaporated, leaving behind debt and broken promises. I made dinner that night from whatever was left in the pantry. Pasta with butter and the last can of green beans. Emma picked at her food while Marcus ate in silence. His jaw set in that way that reminded me painfully of David. After I tucked Emma in, reading her favorite story for the 3rd time that week, I found Marcus sitting on his bed, staring at his phone. You okay, sweetheart? He looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. Dad posted on Instagram. He's in Miami, at some beach resort. My stomach dropped. Can I see? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus handed me his phone reluctantly. There was David, tanned and smiling, a cocktail in one hand and his arm around a woman who couldn't have been more than 25. The caption read, "Living my best life. No regrets. Direst, blessed, new beginnings." The woman was wearing a bikini that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. David was wearing a designer watch I'd never seen before. Behind them, I could see a luxury resort that charged more per night than our rent. He couldn't pay to keep a roof over his children's heads, but he could afford Miami Beach vacations. Something inside me cracked open. Not broken. I'd been broken for months. This was different. This was a door opening onto something cold and calculating and absolutely furious. Mom? Marcus's voice was small. What are we going to do? I handed him back his phone and smoothed his hair the way I'd done since he was a baby. We're going to be fine. I promise you. Go to sleep. But I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my laptop in the dim kitchen light and began researching. David Morrison. His company, Morrison Consulting Group, his business partners, his assets, his social media, everything I could find. By 3 in the morning, I'd discovered several interesting things. First, David's consulting firm was doing exceptionally well. According to their website, they'd landed 3 major corporate clients in the past 6 months. The same 6 months he claimed he couldn't afford child support. Second, the woman in his Instagram photos was named Brianna Chase, 26 years old, a lifestyle influencer with 40,000 followers. Her bio said she was living the dream with my king. Third, and most interesting, David had gotten sloppy with his digital footprint. His LinkedIn profile listed him as CEO of Morrison Consulting Group. His business registration was public record. His assets were traceable if you knew where to look, and I knew where to look. I'd spent 14 years managing our household finances while he focused on his career. I knew every account number, every password he recycled, every financial habit he had. What David didn't know was that before I'd become a nurse, I'd studied forensic accounting. I'd switched careers when Emma was born because nursing offered better hours for a young mother. But I'd never forgotten those skills. I pulled up our joint bank account, the one he thought he'd emptied when he left. He had emptied it of his deposits, but it was still technically a joint account, which meant I could see every transaction he made from his linked accounts, and David had made a lot of transactions. Private school tuition for Brianna's daughter from a previous relationship. $5,000. Designer handbags. $3,000 luxury hotel stays across the country. Tens of thousands of dollars. All while his own children faced eviction. I took screenshots of everything, dated and organized them into folders. Then I started digging deeper. David's business email was still logged in on the old iPad we used to share. I'd never bothered to sign out, and apparently neither had he. I pulled it out from under a stack of mail and powered it on. 473 unread emails. I started reading. By dawn, I had enough information to bury him. I'd found emails to his business partners discussing profit distributions. David had been claiming poverty to avoid child support, but his company had distributed over $300,000 to him in the past 6 months alone. I'd found correspondence with lawyers about hiding assets. Actual written evidence of him deliberately structuring his finances to avoid his obligations. I'd found text messages with Brianna discussing their next vacation. "Babe, let's do Turks and Caicos," she'd written. "I need new content for my Instagram." "Whatever you want, beautiful," David had replied. Money's no object. Money was no object for his girlfriend's Instagram content. But his children could be homeless. Emma found me at the kitchen table that morning, surrounded by papers and printouts. "Mama, you didn't sleep." "I'm okay, baby." I pulled her onto my lap, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair. "How about pancakes for breakfast?" We didn't have much, but I could make pancakes. I could give my children breakfast and get them to school and pretend that everything was normal for a few more hours. After I dropped them off, I didn't go to the hospital for my shift. Instead, I drove to the offices of Morrison Consulting Group. The building was in the expensive part of downtown, all glass and steel and minimalist design. I parked my 10-year-old Honda Civic between a Tesla and a BMW and felt a surge of bitter satisfaction. David had built this with my support, my sacrifice, my belief in him. Now I was going to take it apart brick by brick. I walked into the lobby dressed in my nicest dress, the one I wore to job interviews and parent-teacher conferences. The receptionist looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm here to see David Morrison." "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his wife," the smile faltered. "Oh, let me just—" She picked up the phone, spoke quietly into it, then looked back at me with obvious discomfort. "Mr. Morrison says he's in a meeting. Tell Mr. Morrison that his wife is here regarding the eviction notice his children received yesterday. Tell him I'll wait as long as it takes. Or I can discuss the matter right here in the lobby where all his employees and clients can hear." The receptionist's eyes widened. She spoke into the phone again, more urgently this time. 2 minutes later, David appeared. He looked good. Better than he had when we were together. His suit was expensive, his hair perfectly styled, his tan evidence of his recent Miami trip. For a moment, seeing him made my chest ache with the memory of who we used to be. Then I thought about Emma asking why there was paper on our door, and the ache turned to ice. Rachel. His voice was tight. This isn't appropriate. You can't just show up at my workplace. And you can't just abandon your children. But here we are. He glanced around the lobby, acutely aware of the receptionist and 2 other employees who had suddenly found reasons to linger nearby. Let's talk in my office. I followed him through the open-plan workspace. Employees looked up from their computers, their curiosity barely concealed. I could see them taking in my department store dress, my worn shoes, comparing me to the Instagram pictures of Brianna in her designer everything. David's office was corner suite, all windows and leather furniture. There were photos on his desk, but not of Emma and Marcus. Instead, there was a picture of him and Brianna at some gala, both of them dressed to the nines. Where are your children's pictures? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. David had the grace to look uncomfortable. Rachel, I know you're upset. Upset? David, we're being evicted. Your children are about to be homeless because you haven't paid rent in 4 months. While you've been taking your girlfriend to Miami, I sent money. You sent 2 payments. 6 months ago. Nothing since. He moved behind his desk as if it could protect him from this conversation. My business expenses don't. I slammed a folder onto his pristine desk. Don't lie to me. I have your bank records, your email, your text messages. I know exactly how much money you have and exactly where you've been spending it. His face paled. You went through my joint accounts aren't private, David. And the iPad you left behind is technically community property, along with everything else you're trying to hide. I watched him realize his mistake. The iPad? He'd forgotten about the iPad. What do you want? His voice had gone cold. What do I want? I want my children to have a home. I want the child support you're legally obligated to pay. I want the back payments you owe. And I want you to remember that Emma and Marcus exist. I have cash flow issues right now. You paid $5,000 for Brianna's daughter's private school tuition last week. You don't have cash flow issues. You have priority issues. David's jaw tightened. I recognized that look. It was his negotiation face, the one he used with difficult clients. Fine, I'll transfer some money today. But Rachel, you need to understand I have a new life now. I can't be tied down to your children. Is that what you were going to say? That's not what I meant. Get out. A new voice cut through the tension. I turned to see a woman in her 50s standing in the doorway, her expression thunderous. She was dressed in an immaculate suit, her gray hair cut in a sharp bob. Everything about her radiated authority and barely contained fury. Margaret. David stood up quickly. This is a private conversation. Get out of this office. Pack your personal items. You have 30 minutes before security escorts you out. I watched David's face go from confused to horrified. What are you talking about? You can't fire me. I'm the CEO. This is my company. Actually, Margaret said, her voice ice cold, it's 40% your company. I own 30%, Richard owns 30%, and we've just voted you out. Effective immediately. You can't do this. We absolutely can. Per the operating agreement you signed, any partner can be removed for cause by majority vote, and hiding assets to avoid child support while charging personal expenses to the company accounts. That's absolutely cause. She turned to me and her expression softened slightly. Mrs. Morrison, I apologize. If I'd known what was happening, I would have intervened sooner. My own daughter is a single mother. I know how difficult it can be. I stared at her, trying to process what was happening. How did you... The receptionist called me after you left. She has a good heart and a loud voice when she's upset. Half the office heard your conversation in the lobby. Margaret looked back at David with disgust. We've been investigating irregularities in the accounts for weeks. Your wife just confirmed our suspicions. David looked between us, his face flushing red. This is insane. You're throwing away everything we built, You threw it away when you decided luxury vacations were more important than feeding your children. Margaret pulled out her phone. Security will be here in 5 minutes. I suggest you start packing. As David frantically grabbed items from his desk, Margaret turned to me. I'll have our attorneys contact you. We'll be recovering the funds he misappropriated from the company. I imagine your divorce attorney would be very interested in those findings. I don't have a divorce attorney. You do now. She handed me a business card. Ellen Chen, best family lawyer in the state. Tell her Margaret Hartwell sent you. She owes me a favor. I took the card with shaking hands, unable to fully process what had just happened. I'd come here to confront David, maybe shame him into doing the right thing. Instead, I'd walked into a corporate uprising. Why are you helping me? I asked. Margaret's expression hardened. Because men like David think they can get away with anything. They build their success on the backs of others, then throw those people away when they become inconvenient. My ex-husband was the same way. She glanced at David, who was now stuffing files into his briefcase with jerky, angry movements. The difference is I had the power to make him pay for it. And now I'm using that power to help you. Security arrived. 2 large men in uniform who looked thoroughly uncomfortable as they waited for David to gather his things. This isn't over, David said, pointing at me. You had no right to go through my private information. That's illegal. I'll sue you for everything. Joint accounts and abandoned property aren't protected by privacy laws, Margaret interrupted. But please, do hire an attorney to argue that point. I'm sure they'll be fascinated by your expense reports. David stormed out, flanked by security. Through the windows, I could see other employees watching, their expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction. He wasn't popular here, Margaret said, following my gaze. Good at bringing in clients, terrible at managing people. Several employees filed complaints about his behavior. We were already planning to restructure his role. I sank into one of David's leather chairs, my legs suddenly weak. I can't believe this just happened. Believe it. And Mrs. Morrison? That eviction notice. The company owns several rental properties. We can put you and your children in one until you get back on your feet. Consider it partial compensation for what my former partner put you through. I looked up at her, tears suddenly burning in my eyes. Why? You don't even know me. I don't need to know you to know that you deserve better than this. She gestured around David's now empty office. Besides, it's good business. We need to distance the company from David's misconduct. Helping his abandoned family makes us look responsible and ethical. Because we are. She handed me another business card. This is our property manager. Call him today. And call Ellen Chen. She'll make sure you get everything you're entitled to in the divorce. After Margaret left, I sat alone in David's office for several minutes. The photo of him and Brianna smiled up at me from the desk. I picked it up and dropped it in the trash can. Then I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the empty office, the abandoned desk, the view David would never see again. I sent it to his number with a simple message. The eviction notice gave us 72 hours. You got 30 minutes. I guess karma works faster than the legal system. He didn't respond. But I didn't need him to. I called the property manager from the parking lot. By that evening, we had a lease on a 3-bedroom townhouse in a good school district. The rent was reasonable, the property manager was sympathetic, and for the first time in 6 months, I didn't have to worry about keeping a roof over my children's heads. Ellen Chen, the attorney, agreed to take my case. When I met with her the next day and showed her the evidence I'd compiled, her eyes lit up. This is incredibly thorough, she said, flipping through the folders. You have banking records, email correspondence, evidence of hidden assets, proof of misappropriation of business funds, and documentation of deliberate avoidance of child support obligations. I studied forensic accounting before I became a nurse. Well, thank God for that. Ellen made notes on her legal pad. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to file for divorce with a motion for emergency child support. Given this evidence, the judge will likely grant it immediately. Then we're going to go after back support, a fair division of assets, and because he's been so egregiously awful, probably some additional sanctions. How much are we talking about? Ellen did some quick calculations. With his business distributions and hidden assets, you're looking at roughly $4,000 a month in child support, plus $70,000 in back payments, plus half of his business equity, which based on these records is worth about $600,000. I stared at her. That's what you're legally entitled to, what he owes you, what your children deserve. Ellen looked at me seriously. Rachel, this man left you and your children in poverty while he lived in luxury. He deliberately hid money to avoid his obligations. The law doesn't look kindly on that. Neither do judges. Over the next few days, I moved us into the new townhouse. It was smaller than our old apartment, but cleaner, brighter, in a better neighborhood. Emma got her own room for the first time. Marcus helped me paint his room his favorite color of blue. This is nice. Mom, he said that night as we assembled his new bed frame, purchased with a small loan from Margaret's company that I'd insisted on signing official documents for. Yeah? Yeah, it feels safe. I hugged him tight. This boy who'd grown up too fast in the past 6 months. We're going to be okay. Better than okay. The legal paperwork was filed. David was served at Brianna's apartment. I knew the address from his credit card statements. According to the process server, David had answered the door in a designer robe looking extremely displeased. Good. Ellen moved fast. Within a week, we were in court for the emergency support hearing. David showed up in an expensive suit with an attorney who clearly charged by the hour. My attorney was better. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the evidence Ellen presented. I watched her expression harden as she read through David's bank statements, compared them to his claims of financial hardship, and studied the photos of his Miami vacation. Mr. Morrison, the judge said finally, you reported to Child Services that you could only afford $500 a month in child support due to financial difficulties with your business. Yes, Your Honor, David said, his attorney nodding beside him. The consulting business has been struggling, and yet you've received over $300,000 in business distributions in the past 6 months. David's attorney looked confused. Apparently, David hadn't shared that information with him. I can explain, David started. You charged $14,000 to your business credit card for personal expenses last month alone, including a $5,000 hotel stay in Miami, $3,000 in designer purchases, and $2,000 at restaurants and bars. The judge looked up from the documents. Meanwhile, your children were facing eviction. Your Honor, those expenses were— I don't want to hear it. The judge's voice could have cut glass. Mr. Morrison, your deliberate concealment of assets and income to avoid child support obligations is reprehensible. I'm ordering immediate emergency support of $4,000 per month, retroactive to the date you abandoned your family. That's $24,000 in back support due within 30 days. David's face went pale. Your Honor, I don't have— You have 72 hours to make the first payment, or I'll hold you in contempt. Additionally, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of your finances. If we find further hidden assets, we'll be revisiting this number. She looked at me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Morrison, do you and your children have stable housing? Yes, Your Honor. We just moved into a new place. Good. Mr. Morrison will be paying your rent going forward as part of the support order. She signed the document with a flourish. Next case. Outside the courtroom, David cornered me in the hallway. This is insane, Rachel. You're destroying me. No, David. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure our children survive it. $4,000 a month? Plus back pay? I can't afford that. You afforded Miami. You afforded designer handbags for your girlfriend. You'll afford to feed your children. His attorney pulled him away before he could respond, but I caught the look of pure hatred in his eyes. I'd seen that look before, years ago, when a business deal fell through. David didn't handle losing well, which meant he was going to fight back. I needed to be ready. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at my laptop again. I'd already exposed David's financial deception. But that was just the beginning. I pulled up everything I knew about Morrison Consulting Group. The clients, the contracts, the business practices. If David was going to make this war, I was going to win it. What I found in the next few hours would change everything. Morrison Consulting Group had built its success on David's ability to bring in major corporate clients. But digging deeper into the public records and cross-referencing them with his email history, I found something interesting. 3 of their biggest clients had contracts that looked almost identical. Same structure, same terms, same unusual clauses. That wasn't necessarily suspicious. Maybe David just had a template he liked. But then I noticed the dates. All 3 contracts were signed within a 2-week period, right after Morrison Consulting Group secured a major loan to expand operations. I pulled up the loan documents. They were public records since it was through a government small business program. The loan required proof of projected income. Proof that Morrison Consulting Group provided through those 3 contracts, except according to the email timestamps I could see in David's iPad, those contracts were finalized after the loan was approved. The versions submitted with the loan application were signed, but the actual negotiated terms were different. That was fraud. Federal fraud, since it involved a government loan. I sat back, my heart pounding. This was bigger than child support. This was the kind of thing that destroyed companies and sent people to prison, and I had documented proof. I downloaded everything onto a secure drive. Then I sent an anonymous tip to the Small Business Administration's fraud hotline, along with copies of the relevant documents. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. 2 weeks after I filed the tip, federal investigators showed up at Morrison Consulting Group. Margaret called me personally. "Rachel, did you know about the loan fraud?" "I found evidence while going through David's files. I reported it anonymously." There was a pause. "Thank you. We had no idea. David handled all the loan applications himself." "What's going to happen?" "The company will have to repay the loan, but since Richard and I can prove we weren't involved in the fraud, the business itself should survive." "David, however," she trailed off meaningfully, "federal prosecutors are building a case." I hung up and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. David had built his success on lies and stolen money. Now the foundation was crumbling, but I wasn't done yet. I'd spent 14 years supporting David's dreams. I'd sacrificed my career, my education, my ambitions to help him build his success. And the moment I became inconvenient, he'd thrown me away. Now I was going to take back everything he'd stolen, starting with the truth about how Morrison Consulting Group really got started. I pulled out my old laptop, the one I'd used before David insisted I upgrade to something newer. I'd backed up all my files before switching, but I'd never bothered to wipe the old hard drive. Hidden in folders of old photos and forgotten documents, I found what I was looking for. The original business plan for Morrison Consulting Group, written by me. I'd drafted it during David's last year of business school, when he was struggling with his capstone project. He'd been stressed and overwhelmed, so I'd helped. More than helped, I'd essentially written the entire thing. The business model, the financial projections, the market analysis, even the company name. All me. David had submitted it as his own work and graduated with honors. Then he'd used it to launch Morrison Consulting Group, never once crediting me or acknowledging my contribution. I had proof. Dated documents, drafts with my comments, emails discussing the project. Everything time-stamped years before the company was officially founded. I sent it all to Ellen Chen. "This changes things," she said when we met the next day. "If you can prove you created the fundamental business structure that Morrison Consulting Group was built on, you have a strong claim to more than 50% of David's equity in the company." "I can prove it." "I have everything," Ellen smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Good, let's bury him." The divorce proceedings became brutal. David fought every point, contested every claim, hired expensive attorneys to drag out the process. But I had something better than expensive attorneys. I had the truth, documented and irrefutable. The forensic audit the judge ordered revealed even more hidden assets. A second bank account in the Cayman Islands, stock investments in his brother's name, a cryptocurrency wallet worth over $100,000. David had been planning his exit for over a year, carefully hiding money to avoid sharing it in the divorce he knew was coming. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd been so focused on hiding assets from me that he'd forgotten to hide them from the federal government. Tax evasion charges were added to his growing list of legal problems. I watched his carefully constructed life collapse piece by piece. Morrison Consulting Group fired him and distanced themselves from his actions. His clients dropped him when the fraud allegations became public. His friends stopped returning his calls when the tax charges hit the news. Even Brianna left him. I saw the Instagram post announcing her new relationship status, single and loving it. No more toxic men. Self-love or moving, none. The designer handbags and Miami trips had apparently only been appealing when David had money to pay for them. 6 months after I'd walked into David's office, we finally settled the divorce. I got sole custody of Emma and Marcus. David got supervised visitation every other weekend, which he showed up for about half the time. I got the agreed-upon child support, plus half of David's business equity, which Margaret's company bought out at fair market value, giving me a lump sum of $300,000. I got the house we'd been planning to buy before David left, the one with the big backyard and good schools. The down payment came from David's half of the business equity that he was forced to liquidate. I got my self-respect back. David got probation for the tax evasion, a felony record from the loan fraud, and a reputation so damaged he ended up leaving the state entirely. Last I heard, he was working in sales at a car dealership in Nevada, living in a studio apartment, and dating someone new who didn't know about his past. Emma and Marcus thrived in the new house. Marcus joined the basketball team at his new school and made friends easily. Emma started taking art classes and covered our refrigerator with even more drawings. Neither of them asked about their father much anymore. As for me, I went back to school. With the settlement money, I could afford to finish my forensic accounting degree. It turned out I had a talent for finding financial fraud, something Margaret's company recognized when she offered me a consulting position. You took down your ex-husband's empire with a laptop and determination, she'd said. Imagine what you could do for our clients. I accepted. 1 year after the eviction notice appeared on our door, I stood in our new home, watching Emma and Marcus play in the backyard. The house was filled with their laughter, their artwork, their life. David had tried to erase us. He'd walked away thinking we were inconvenient problems he could simply abandon. Instead, we'd erased him. His company, his reputation, his freedom, all dismantled by the wife he'd underestimated. The revenge wasn't in destroying him. The revenge was in thriving without him, in building a better life from the ashes he'd left behind, in teaching my children that sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't matching it. It's succeeding so completely that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. David had left us homeless. I'd left him powerless, and I'd never looked back. 3 years had passed. Since that eviction notice changed everything, I should have been satisfied with how things turned out. David was a convicted felon working minimum wage in Nevada. I had a thriving career, a beautiful home, and my children were happy. But there was one thing that still haunted me: the other families. It started when I received a message through LinkedIn from a woman named Patricia Rodriguez. Her profile picture showed a tired-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes. Mrs. Morrison, her message read, I hope this doesn't seem strange, but I saw the news articles about your ex-husband's fraud case. My ex-husband worked with David at Morrison Consulting Group. He left me and our 3 children the same way, claiming poverty while hiding assets. I never had the resources to fight him like you did. I just wanted to say thank you for exposing what these men do. You gave me hope. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I clicked on Patricia's profile and began researching her ex-husband. His name was Marcus Chen. He'd been one of David's drinking buddies during the early days of Morrison Consulting Group, before Margaret and Richard bought him out when they couldn't stand his behavior anymore. According to Patricia's sparse social media presence, she was working 2 jobs to support her children. Her ex-husband had relocated to California and, like David, had started over with a new life and a younger girlfriend. I drafted a response. Deleted it. drafted another. Finally, I wrote, Patricia, would you be willing to meet for coffee? I might be able to help. We met at a cafe near the hospital where I still worked part-time to maintain my nursing license. Patricia arrived exactly on time, dressed in discount store clothes that had been carefully maintained, her hands showing the wear of manual labor. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I wasn't sure you'd respond. Tell me about Marcus. Over the next hour, Patricia laid out a story painfully similar to my own. Marcus had left her 3 years ago, claiming his consulting business wasn't making enough money to support 2 households. He'd convinced the court he could only afford minimal child support. Meanwhile, he'd bought a condo in San Diego, drove a Porsche, and posted regularly on social media about his lifestyle upgrades. I tried to go back to court, Patricia said, her voice breaking, but I couldn't afford a good lawyer. Marcus's attorney buried me in paperwork and delays until I just gave up. My kids ask why their dad has money for everything except them. I pulled out my tablet. Tell me everything you know about Marcus's finances. Every detail, no matter how small. Patricia looked confused. Why? Because I'm going to help you do what I did to David. And then we're going to find every other woman these men have destroyed. And we're going to make sure they all get justice. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I can't afford— You don't need to. Consider it pro bono work. I smiled. I'm very good at finding hidden money, and I'm even better at making sure it ends up in the right hands. That night, I started digging into Marcus Chen's finances. It took me 3 days of careful investigation, but I found what I was looking for. Marcus had hidden assets, too. Not as sophisticated as David's schemes, but effective enough to fool a family court judge who wasn't looking too closely. Shell corporations. Business accounts in his girlfriend's name. Real estate investments disguised as business expenses. I documented everything and sent it to Ellen Chen, who agreed to take Patricia's case at a reduced rate, with the understanding that I'd assist with the forensic accounting. But Marcus was just the beginning. Through Patricia, I connected with a network of abandoned mothers, women who'd been left behind while their ex-husbands built new lives, claiming poverty while living in luxury. There was Jennifer, whose ex-husband claimed he could only afford $300 a month in child support while he paid $2,000 a month for his new wife's student loans. There was Samantha, whose ex-husband hid his income by being paid in cryptocurrency and gift cards from his family business. There was Maria, whose ex-husband had convinced the court he was unemployed while actually working under the table at his brother's construction company. Each woman had been failed by a system that believed the lies of men who knew how to work it. Each woman was struggling to provide for her children while their fathers lived comfortably. I started a private spreadsheet. Names, dates, financial information, evidence of fraud. It grew longer every week. You're building something, Ellen observed during one of our meetings. This is bigger than individual cases. These men think they can abandon their responsibilities because the system doesn't work hard enough to catch them, I said, reviewing another case file. They're right. The system doesn't work, so I'm going to make it work. Ellen leaned back in her chair. You know what you're describing? A vigilante operation. I'm describing justice. These women deserve the same resources I had, the same chance to fight back. And if you get caught breaking privacy laws, hacking into accounts? I'm not hacking anything. I'm using publicly available information, combined with what these women already have access to as former spouses. Everything I'm doing is legal, I paused. Aggressive but legal. Ellen smiled slowly. You've thought this through. I've had 3 years to think about it. The network grew. Through word of mouth and careful vetting, more women reached out. Each one had a story. Each one needed help. I couldn't take every case. I had my own children to think about, my own career to manage. But I could help with the ones where financial fraud was clear and the evidence was accessible. Over the next year, I worked on 14 cases. Ellen handled the legal aspects while I provided the forensic accounting. Margaret's company donated resources and office space for what we started, calling the Financial Justice Project. We won 12 of the 14 cases, 12. Women received back child support they'd been owed for years. 12 families got the resources they needed. 12 men who thought they'd gotten away with abandoning their responsibilities learned they hadn't. But 2 of the men we investigated were different, smarter, more careful. One of them was Richard Torres, a successful real estate developer who'd left his wife and 4 children to start over with his secretary. He'd hidden his assets so well that even I couldn't find definitive proof. The other was James Sutherland, a tech executive who'd built his wealth after leaving his family. He claimed he'd been poor when he left, and that his success came afterward, so he owed nothing beyond minimal support. Both cases ate at me. I knew these men were lying. I knew they'd abandoned their families and were now living in luxury while their children struggled. But I couldn't prove it, until Emma, now 11 years old, inadvertently gave me an idea. "Mom," she asked one evening while I was working on the Torres case, "why can't you just ask the computer where the money is?" "What do you mean, honey?" "Like how you found Daddy's secret bank account. You said the computer told you because all the accounts talk to each other." She was oversimplifying, but she wasn't wrong. Digital footprints were everywhere. The question was whether I was willing to push ethical boundaries to follow them. I thought about Richard Torres's ex-wife, struggling to feed 4 children while he bought a vacation home in Aspen. I thought about James Sutherland's daughter, who'd had to drop out of college because her father claimed he couldn't help with tuition while he donated 6 figures to his new wife's charity. I made a decision. I called a contact I'd made through the forensic accounting world, someone who specialized in digital investigation and operated in the gray areas of legal and not quite legal. His name was Alex Kim, and he was very good at finding things people didn't want found. "I need information," I told him during our encrypted video call. "But I need it obtained legally." "Define legally," Alex said with a slight smile. "I need to know if you can trace cryptocurrency transactions and offshore accounts using only publicly available blockchain data and corporate filings." "Absolutely. It's time-consuming but completely legal." "What are you looking for?" I sent him the details on Richard Torres and James Sutherland. 2 weeks later, Alex sent me his findings. Richard Torres had indeed hidden assets in a complex web of real estate LLCs that all traced back to his girlfriend's father's investment company. The properties were generating significant rental income that Torres was receiving under the table. James Sutherland was even more interesting. His post-divorce success had actually started with a 6-figure investment from his new wife's family, investment he'd secured by lying about his previous marriage and claiming to be divorced due to his ex-wife's spending problems rather than his own abandonment. I had evidence. Legal evidence. Enough to reopen both cases. Ellen filed the motions. The judges, already familiar with our track record, granted hearings. Richard Torres settled out of court when faced with the evidence, agreeing to triple his child support and pay $150,000 in back support. James Sutherland fought. His expensive attorneys argued that post-divorce income wasn't subject to recalculation. They claimed his new wife's family investment had nothing to do with his original marriage. But I'd found something else. James had told the original divorce court that he had no assets and no prospects. Meanwhile, he'd been secretly developing the business plan that his new wife's family later invested in, while still married. That business plan was created using software licensed to his original family computer. Software I could prove he'd been working on 6 months before he filed for divorce. The judge ruled that James had deliberately concealed assets and future earning potential during the original divorce. She ordered a recalculation of child support and awarded his ex-wife a portion of his business equity. James appealed. We won the appeal. His daughter was able to return to college. The Financial Justice Project was gaining attention. Local news did a story about our work. Then national outlets picked it up. I started receiving dozens of requests for help every week. I couldn't handle them all alone, so I did something I never expected. I started training others. With Margaret's support, I developed a workshop series teaching basic forensic accounting skills to divorced mothers and family law attorneys. How to spot hidden assets. How to trace financial transactions. How to build a case. The first workshop had 15 attendees. The second had 50. By the sixth, we had to move to a hotel conference room to accommodate 200 people. "You're creating an army," Ellen joked after one particularly well-attended session. "I'm creating equity," I corrected. "These women deserve the same tools and knowledge the men use against them." But not everyone was happy about our work. I started receiving threatening messages. Anonymous emails telling me to back off, to mind my own business, to stop destroying men's lives. Some were clearly from the ex-husbands we'd successfully prosecuted. Others seemed to come from men's rights groups who saw our work as an attack rather than justice. I ignored most of them. But then things escalated. Someone filed a bar complaint against Ellen, claiming she was engaging in unethical practices by working with a non-attorney investigator. Someone reported me to the state nursing board, claiming I was neglecting my patients while pursuing my vendetta. Someone hacked our Financial Justice Project website and posted my home address and phone number. Marcus started having nightmares again. Emma became anxious about going to school. They were being punished for my choices, just like they'd been punished for David's. I almost quit. Then I received a letter from Patricia Rodriguez's daughter, Elena. She was 16 now, thriving in school, planning to attend college, all possible because her mother could finally afford to support her properly after we'd helped recover what Marcus owed. "Dear Mrs. Morrison," the letter read, "I wanted to thank you for helping my mom. Before you did, I thought all adults were like my dad, people who break promises and don't care who they hurt. You showed me that some people fight for what's right even when it's hard. Because of you, I want to become a lawyer and help families like mine. Thank you for not giving up on us." I taped that letter to my computer monitor. The attacks continued, but so did we. Ellen fought the bar complaint and won. The nursing board investigation found no merit to the claims. We improved our website security and got restraining orders against the most aggressive harassers, and we kept working. In the 3 years since I'd met Patricia, the Financial Justice Project had helped over 100 families recover more than $4 million in unpaid child support and hidden assets. We'd trained thousands of women and attorneys in forensic accounting basics. We'd lobbied successfully for state legislation requiring more thorough financial disclosure in divorce cases involving children. We'd changed the conversation about deadbeat parents from "these women are just greedy" to "these men are committing fraud." But the story that meant the most to me happened on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving the grocery store with Emma and Marcus when a young woman approached me. She was in her early 20s, dressed in a college sweatshirt, carrying textbooks. "Mrs. Morrison?" she asked hesitantly. "Rachel Morrison? Yes? I'm Brianna's daughter. From when she was with your ex-husband." I felt Emma tense beside me. Marcus's hand found mine. The young woman, I suddenly remembered her name was Kayla, looked nervous but determined. I wanted to apologize. "My mom told me what happened, how David abandoned you and your kids while he was paying for my private school. I was 15 then. I didn't understand what was happening or where the money was coming from." "You don't need to apologize," I said gently. "You were a child. None of that was your fault." "I know, but..." Kayla took a breath. "I wanted you to know that I'm in college now, studying social work. I want to help families going through divorce, especially kids, because I saw what happened to Emma and Marcus through their dad's actions, and I saw what my mom's choices did to other people. I want to do better." I looked at this young woman who could have blamed me for her mother's breakup with David, who could have resented my children for existing. Instead, she'd turned her experience into purpose. "That's wonderful, Kayla. Really." She smiled, then looked at Emma and Marcus. "Your mom is amazing. What she did, standing up to David, getting justice not just for you but for all those other families, that changed how I see the world. You should be really proud of her." After Kayla left, Emma hugged me in the parking lot. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm better than okay, sweetie." That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on our back porch with a cup of tea. The house David had insisted we couldn't afford was peaceful in the darkness. Through the window, I could see Emma's art projects and Marcus's basketball trophies. My phone buzzed. A message from Ellen. Another case. Single mom, 3 kids, ex hiding income through his family's business. She found your workshop materials online and documented everything. She's already done half our work for us. You've created something that's going to outlive both of us. I smiled and typed back. Good. That was always the point. The real victory wasn't in destroying David. It wasn't even in helping individual families. Though that mattered immensely, the real victory was in creating a system, a network, a movement of women who refused to be victims anymore. David had tried to make me powerless. Instead, he'd taught me exactly how powerful I could be. He'd tried to erase us. Instead, he'd inspired me to make sure no one else got erased. I thought about where David was now, living in a studio apartment in Nevada, working for minimum wage, his name permanently attached to fraud and abandonment. I didn't hate him anymore. I barely thought about him. He was just a cautionary tale now, a lesson in what happens when you underestimate someone. The eviction notice that had once filled me with terror was framed in my office now, next to Elena's letter and a photo of all the women we'd helped. A reminder of where we'd started and how far we'd come. Marcus came out onto the porch, unable to sleep. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever wish none of it happened? Like, do you wish Dad had just been a good person and we'd still be a normal family? I pulled him down to sit beside me. You know what, sweetheart? 3 years ago, I would have said yes. I would have given anything to have my old life back. And now? Now I look at our life, really look at it, and I see that we're happier than we ever were when your dad was here. I have work that matters. You and Emma are thriving. We have a home we love. And I helped create something that's making the world a little bit better. So you're glad it happened? I'm glad we survived it. I'm glad we turned something terrible into something meaningful. But mostly I'm glad you and Emma know that you can face hard things and come out stronger. Marcus leaned against me. Dad called me last week. My heart clenched. He did? What did he say? He wanted to know if I'd talked to you about reducing his child support. He said he's struggling and needs help. What did you tell him? I told him that we struggled too and he didn't care. I told him that you taught me to help people who are trying their best, but not people who are just trying to avoid responsibility. Marcus looked up at me. Was that wrong? I hugged him tightly. That was perfect. You're going to be an amazing man, Marcus. Nothing like your father. I want to be like you. We sat together in the darkness, and I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The fear, the anger, the determination, the victory. David had left us homeless, but we'd built a better home than he ever could have. Provided, he'd left us powerless, but we'd created power from nothing and used it to help others. He'd tried to erase us. Instead, we'd made ourselves unforgettable. The eviction notice had given us 72 hours to vacate. In that time, David probably thought he'd won. Thought he'd escaped his responsibilities and could start fresh without consequence. He couldn't have been more wrong. In those 72 hours, I'd begun building the foundation for everything that came after. The investigation, the justice, the career, the network, the movement. David had meant to destroy us with that eviction notice. Instead, he'd given me the push I needed to discover exactly who I was, capable of becoming. And who I became was someone who made sure no other woman had to face what I faced, alone. Someone who turned her pain into purpose. Someone who taught her children that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. I looked at Marcus, nearly as tall as me now, strong and kind and nothing like the man who'd abandoned him. Come on, I said, standing up. Let's get you back to bed. School tomorrow. Mom? Marcus paused at the door. Thank you. For what? For not giving up. For fighting back. For showing me what strong looks like. After he went upstairs, I stood on the porch a moment longer. Somewhere in Nevada, David was probably sleeping in his studio apartment. Maybe dreaming of the life he'd thrown away. I hoped he was. I hoped he understood exactly what he'd lost, not the money or the status or the comfortable life, but the chance to watch his children grow into extraordinary people, the chance to be part of something that mattered, the chance to be loved by someone who would have fought for him the way I now fought for others. He'd thrown all of that away for Miami vacations and Instagram photos and a lifestyle that had evaporated the moment the money ran out. I'd taken what he left behind and built something that would last. I walked back into our home, our real home, filled with laughter and love and safety. Emma's artwork on the walls, Marcus's basketball shoes by the door, report cards on the refrigerator showing straight A's. The life David had tried to destroy was thriving, and tomorrow, I'd wake up and help another family do the same. That was my revenge. Not his destruction, but our resurrection. Not his pain, but our peace. Not his ending, but our new beginning. David had left me homeless with our kids. I'd responded by making sure no family would be homeless because of someone like him ever again. And I'd never felt more at home in my life. The end up next. You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.